Alright, so this is my presentation on James Joyce's The Dead and the selected manifestos that we had to read. So I wanted to give a little bit of background information on James Joyce first. He was a modernist writer, and he focused on the character's conscience, thoughts, and reasonings. And The Dead is a good example of this. We saw throughout the story that we heard a lot of Gabriel's thoughts and feelings and just whatever was going on inside of his head. Joyce was also kind of at the forefront of the modernism literary movement. He really helped to kind of pave the way for the literature during this time period and even into the postmodernism period. Alright, so next I want to talk about some key terms in The Dead. So one of them is paralysis, and this term refers to the Irish people that were oppressed by the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, and England. This was a concept that Joyce wanted to include as a part of his collection called The Dubliners, so that readers could understand what his country was going through. He kind of illustrated all of this through the characters in The Dead, and also free and direct discourse. So this term means that the character's conscience as well as the narrator's thoughts are kind of intertwined together and kind of interchange with each other throughout the story. So throughout The Dead, Joyce uses free and direct discourse through the main character, which is Gabriel. It's often kind of hard to tell as you're reading whether you're kind of reading the narrator's conscience and feelings or Gabriel's conscience and feelings. Alright, and now for some important concepts in The Dead. So Irish nationalism is involved in The Dead because that's just kind of the time period that it takes place in. Irish nationalism is kind of a thing. This term basically means that the Irish people are a cohesive people. So this means that they stick together, they uphold the same values, and etc. In the story, Gabriel kind of strays from this during his conversation with Miss Ivers, in which he states, "Irish is not my language." This kind of drew a lot of attention from the surrounding people at the party, because what he was saying was kind of offensive and it was kind of awkward and weird, and a lot of people didn't like it. Also, the concept of the anti-hero. So an anti-hero is basically the opposite of a hero. Not necessarily a bad guy, but they kind of display the opposite characteristics that a hero might. So Gabriel can be considered one because he's awkward and clumsy and anxious and introverted. He's just kind of a bunch of things that a typical hero would not be, or a protagonist for that matter. Alright, and lastly, I will just talk about the manifestos that we had to read. So, Marx and Engels' Manifesto of the Communist Party. This was written when communism was kind of first becoming a thing. Marx and Engels were the first to write a manifesto and thus created a new revolutionary genre. The main premise of it surrounded the difference between classes created by governments and the change that these classes can kind of bring about. The Manifesto of Surrealism by Breton. So Breton is kind of the author who defined surrealism. He used an automatic writing style, which is a technique of composition seeking to evade conscious planning, and used Freud's theory of unconsciousness in his writing. His manifesto had a large, lasting impact on the art community as well. And Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. So he focuses on the destructiveness of colonialism on individuals. And it's also important to understand the ideas of the other and as well as the gaze when you're reading his works. And this is just my reference page. I hope this was helpful to y'all, and I hope everybody does well on the test.